All right, hello and welcome back. This is the session that I'm recording to go over the basic guidelines for your research paper. This research paper is basically your one chance to pick a topic that you are actually interested in and to explore it with a little bit depth. Unfortunately, we go through this course and it's pretty much the basics of American government. And so things that you may have a more nuanced interest in, we may not get to explore very much in class, and sometimes we may not even really get to even mention those things. But this will give you an opportunity to go off and do some research on something that is of interest to you. So the good part about that is, of course, that it lets you explore your interest. The bad part is that, especially here in the summer sessions, you have to really pace yourself and work on this throughout the semester and keep up with it. We do have a bunch of weekly assignments. This is one of your major assignments. Really, the other two are the exams, the midterm and the final. But you know, if you keep up with it, work on it a little bit at the time, then you should have no trouble. For my summer session, I have also given you kind of like an extra week. So if you finish up your work in the normal week, we would go right into the summer break. And if you finished your weekly assignments, then that means you would have at least that full week to devote to finishing this assignment up. But there are a few things that you should have in place already. So if you can see the screen there, this is the home page for your course or for a course exactly like yours. I'm going to navigate over here on the left and I'm going to click on the references link. And you can see right in the middle are the research paper references. And when I click that, your basic guidelines are right there. We will revisit these other things as we go through the semester. There will be a recording done on the writing guide. I will go over, or have actually already gone over, the research paper common errors. You can see that recording posted down at the bottom. The two links in between those are the Purdue OWL writing guide. Your style for this is the Chicago Manual style, and it is quite a bit different than what you might be used to with MLA. Some of you may have used APA, but there's quite a bit of difference. So I'm going to, go over that eventually with you. All right, right now, I'm going to switch over and we're going to actually look at those guidelines. And I'm going to try to keep this relatively short and then go into a bit of the discussion of, how to pick a topic. All right. As you can see, that's what's going to come up when you open this. I'm going to basically blow it up a little bit so it's easier to see. But basically, you can pick any topic that you want that relates to the materials covered by your course. So it has to be a political science topic. For this class, it's American government, so it does have to be American government. We do have a few other general rules. You can see that there's a Political Science 2401 Global Issues class. Generally, I try to get students to stay away from international issues like our relationship with, say, China, Taiwan, Russia, or the Ukraine presently are big topics. And the reason is because this class really focuses on how our government works, and not really our foreign policy. The global issues class would be, of course, more suited for that. All right. Now, as it says in parentheses there, no historical topics. So please don't give me something about the Constitutional Convention. That did not happen last week. That happened well over 200 years ago. That would make it historical. Pick something that is current. Now, it can be something that is a current event. For example, you may be looking at the recent change in the Speaker of the House of Representatives or the failed motion to fire the new Speaker of the House, or you may look at President Biden's student loan forgiveness programs, or anything that's an actual political issue in a purest sense. But you can also look at something, for example, like a constitutional issue. You can look at something related to freedom of speech. It will have to be much more narrow than just freedom of speech, but we have several cases pending. At present, you see a lot of universities shutting down protests on college campuses. Some of those are state institutions, so looking at what the laws are and where your freedom extends on a college campus that is state property might be something that would be a passable topic. Right. When we come down to the second bullet point, that's actually what I actually reinforced there. It's got to be narrow. You want to do original research and writing. You don't want to be rehashing something that's been written about a bunch of times. It also has to be in depth. It should not be something that's done so much that everybody basically already knows it. So if you did free speech, for example, that would be far too broad. What you might look at would be, say, a recent Supreme Court decision that had a free speech topic. It would be much more narrow and focused. For example, maybe something along the lines of what I just said. What's the boundary of exercising free speech on state property? What are the limits that the state can use to restrict that free speech? All right. You could also look at some topics, and you got to understand that some things could look pretty broad and some things could look pretty narrow. Your assumptions might be wrong in both cases. So, again, free speech, we see that every year. There's at least 2-3 Supreme Court cases every year involving free speech. So that would obviously, I hope, be far too broad. But if you looked at something, even a very narrow focused single states law on gun control, for example. Gun control is a topic that has gotten so much attention that you could basically write a book on it. And that's a good guideline. If you can go to the library and find a book on your topic, you have a very bad topic, because to cover it thoroughly, you would have to write at least that much. If you got a 500-page book, you would have to write 500 pages, and we do not have time for that. I don't have time to read it. You don't have time to write it. You would have to come up with something much more narrow. All right. When in doubt, email me, and I'll try to help you find a topic that fits. I can make some suggestions if you want to do free speech, and I can give you some very narrow applications that might be very recent and topical right now. All right. There is a page requirement for this. As you can see, it is a minimum of 5, and I do have a maximum of 7 pages of actual text. Please note the bold print here. If you do a cover page and you have a bibliography, those do not count towards your 5 pages. If you give me 5 pieces of equivalent, it's electronic, but if you give me what would have been 5 pieces of paper and one of them's a cover page, then what you have is 4 pages that you're submitting to me. If you've got the bibliography in there too, you're giving me 3 pages on the research paper. It has to be 5 pages of text. You do have the option of doing footnotes or endnotes. You will be doing notes for the research paper. The difference is where you put those. The format of the note itself is no different. An endnote goes on a separate page. That also would not count towards your 5. All right. So I had mentioned at the beginning, the format is the Chicago Manual style. You see that as CMOS or sometimes CMS for the abbreviation. There is a citation guide and a writing guide. Those are why there are 2 separate links to Chicago Manual. One actually was to the guide, and the other was to a sample paper. So I would suggest using both of those. They do provide samples for citations, for example, in the actual guide, but the indentations, when you put it on a web page and you have different browsers, doesn't always come out the way it's intended. So what you see on the paper, the sample paper, would be sometimes giving you a better idea of how you'd have to do the line spacing, indentation, and all of that. So use both of those resources, right? There is a rubric. You can find that in the assignment. You can click on the assignment. There is a submit button. If you do not click that, it doesn't matter. You can go in and click on the research paper link 1,000 times. Unless you actually hit the submit button, it does not submit anything. So you can go into the assignment as many times as you want. There will be a button there that you'll see that says view rubric, and you can pull that up. All right. All right. For this assignment, you do need 10 sources. Half should be primary. Depends on your topic what a primary source is. So again, if you have doubts, let me know. If you did something on free speech and we narrowed it down to a Supreme Court case, that case decision itself would be a primary source. Generally, if it's something related to the government, what is generated by the government, like a law, a statute, an executive order for the president or regulations in the executive, bodies, court decisions, all of those would be primary sources. I am going to do a separate video on finding sources. So that should help. The secondary sources, this is where most people really have their trouble there for some reason. The primary sources seem a little bit easier in this particular instance. A secondary source, the general rule is it needs to come from a peer-reviewed academic journal or from a law review. All right. You can use books. They have to be college-level books, of course. But generally speaking, for American government, you're going to find journals. The topics that you have, if there's a book on it, it's probably something that's a little either too old or it's gotten too much attention. So generally speaking, you should be looking for journals, right? Some topics, depending on what you're doing. For example, if you're looking at how social media influences a congressional race, then the postings or the media, newspaper articles, things like that in certain topics can be an appropriate source. But again, it's something that you should approach with caution. And if you do that, you still need those peer-reviewed journals. That's what you do in, academic writing. You have to rely on some peer-reviewed journals. So even if you do that, as it says, at least 3 of those secondary sources still need to be peer-reviewed articles, right? And again, if you think that's the case, approval should be obtained. So you should ask me if you've got one of those topics or if you are putting your sources together, can I use these newspaper articles given what my topic is, right? 8th bullet point, if you don't have, academic sources, you're going to do poorly. But if you have your academic sources, then you can use other sources on top of that. So what this says is you can use non-academic sources, but they don't count for your rubric requirements, and that's what it means. You got to get the 5 journals. If you got the 5 journals, then you can put a newspaper article, I don't care, because you have your 5 journals, all right? You can maybe find, 6 sources, 7 sources, if that's the case, 5 that are peer-reviewed journals, 1 or 2 that are something else, that's perfectly fine, all right? Also, when we look at some things, like if you're looking at a particular election race, governor's race, for example, then you may have to something that looks like a secondary source because you may actually have like a newspaper article. But in that article, what you're looking at is not anything that the journalist wrote. What you're looking for is the quotes that they took from one of the gubernatorial candidates. That would actually be primary source, but you have to cite it a certain way. So a lot of this you have to be careful with, and it depends on what you're using and how you're using it, what your topic is, as to what kind of source a particular thing actually is. So again, you should interact, and we will have 2 assignments where you turn in 1 set primary sources, 5 of them, a second where you turn in the 5 secondary sources. I do grade those and put feedback. So the feedback is the important thing. There are 3 assignments in this entire course where you can do either really a late submission or you can do a repeat. So if you turn in your 5 sources, you divide 100 by 5, that's 20. So if you get a 20 on it, that means you got 1 source that fit the criteria and 4 that didn't. You can submit again, and maybe then you get a 60. That means you got 2 of them fixed. So now you got 3 good sources and 2 you got to fix. But read the feedback, because it'll tell you why those are not good sources. And, then you can proceed. And of course, if you have doubt, we can communicate by email. All right. Now, generally speaking, this 9th one, websites are not good sources, period. Don't use them. However, there are some journals and books in electronic format that's acceptable. You will find those, and when I do the video on searching for sources, I will have 2 places on the web where you can go to find peer-reviewed journals. One of those you may have used, it's Galileo. It's pretty much a service that the whole college uses, so you may have used it in another course. The other is JSTOR, which you are less likely to have used, but you can pretty much guarantee that you can easily find the proper sources on those, and those are perfectly fine. Just because it's a journal on the web is not prohibitive, but a web page is prohibitive. I don't mean you can go to, statedepartment.gov, all right, as a secondary source. You can't. But if you find the Journal of the American Political Science Association and you pick an article on it and it just happens to be on the web page, that's okay. And that is the difference. You have to look at what you are using, the words on the source, not just where it is. It doesn't matter if it's on a web page or not. It matters what is on that web page itself. If it's a journal article on the web page, it's fine. If it's a primary source, it's fine. If you're just using a web page and it's got a bunch of stuff about the law, it's not a primary source and it's not peer reviewed, you can't use it, period. Right. All right, the last one, there's a few topics that have gotten so much attention that it is really not possible to deal with them. If you did something, and there's really only 3 of them here, I try not to ban topics. You can see what they are at the bottom. I'll go ahead and mention those. The big 3, abortion, gun control, and presidential elections. This may change over the course of time as other things, take precedence and get a lot of attention. But the reason they're banned is they've gotten so much attention that they have literally been done to death. You might think you have a very narrow topic, and this is what I said earlier, where you may have something that looks very narrow, and it's not. You could look at, for example, on abortion, how Medicare funding from the federal government is earmarked and whether it is actually able to offset costs of abortions within just the state of Georgia. You could write a book on that. So you can't do a 5-page paper and cover the whole thing in that, obviously. All right. If you do note these topics, though, what is at issue is not necessarily literally just abortion or just gun control. Right? There is a root of usually constitutional principle to those 2. Right? Obviously, if it's gun control, the example I used there in the 10th bullet is, gun control gets all the attention. And of course, you do bring up the Second Amendment with that, but you're really talking about guns. You're not talking about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment prohibits or preserves really the right to the people to bear arms, right? Whether it prohibits the government from infringing on that right is actually somewhat debatable because there are different interpretations of it. But for example, I've had some students who I've referred to look at, there's a few states, Massachusetts, Arizona, and California come to mind that banned martial arts weapons, simple, you've seen them in the movie, nunchuka, for example. Those are not guns, all right? Were those laws constitutional, and that's actually looking very much at the Second Amendment. Can they ban arms, which is the phrasing they use, not guns, right? And what is the issue in that? Same thing with abortion. Your root in Roe versus Wade was looking at the rights to privacy. So I've had some students who looked at some other things that are very closely related. For example, birth control and whether that can now be regulated. There are some other things on the flip side. If you looked at this, as the Alabama State Supreme Court did, is defining the fetus as a living human. I think they did that ruling, and it basically made everybody quit doing the in vitro fertilization. So look at those root topics. Those that might still be doable. So if you want to do abortion, gun control, presidential elections, let me know. We can find something else. The presidential elections, again, have been done to death. These include a lot of people who have wanted to look at the impact of social media on elections. And when they pick that topic, they're specifically looking at the presidential election, particularly, I guess, with Trump's usage of what was then Twitter and now X, right? But there are other elections, and we don't really delve into them. So the senatorial elections might be a little big, but you could look at your local House of Representatives, state assembly people, local officials, whether it's a county commission or city council or mayoral election, and look at the impact on those, all right? But you will have your first assignment coming up, which is to come up with the topic. Now, again, this is one that you can redo, but it's better to get a jump on this. So my suggestion would be, when you've got an idea for a topic, email me and we can discuss it and get it narrowed down. What happens is, if you just submit the topic, let's say you get a 0 on it, my comment might be something like, free speech is great, but you got to be more narrow. And then you submit again, and it's not until the next week that I'll look at it. So you basically lose a week that way. You can actually email me right up front and we can look at topics. Now, if you get the 0 off that, you think you got a good one, you submit it, it ends up with a 0, then of course I would suggest emailing definitely at that point, so you don't take a whole nother week to get feedback on your second submission. And then we can get you started so that you don't fall behind. And that's especially important in the summer, because we have basically a pace that's twice as fast because we have half as much time. All right, that concludes this one. I will go ahead and shoot one on the sources. That will be up for next week. But go ahead and get your submissions in. Again, email me. Let me know what you want to do, and I'll see if I can help you get it narrowed down. And hopefully you can go ahead and just submit it once, get it approved, get the 100 on that assignment, and move on into the research phase. All right, thank you and have a good week.